Welcome to Podcast on the Brink, your weekly dose of Indiana basketball news and discussion, brought to you by the Assembly Call and Inside the Hall. I'm your host, Jerod Morris. Join me live at assemblycall.com every Thursday night and immediately following every IU game for our live IU postgame show. And visit InsideTheHall.com for complete coverage of IU basketball and to join the discussion in the Inside the Hall Premium Forum.
Indiana basketball mini-series tickets are now available online at iuhoosiers.com. Both 5-game and 3-game packages are now available, featuring games against Louisiana Tech, South Dakota State, Arkansas, Northwestern, and Ohio State. Come check out your Indiana Hoosiers for these games over break inside beautiful Simon Scott Assembly Hall. You can visit iuhoosiers.com for more information. Go IU!
On this week's edition of Podcast on the Brink, Rick Bozich from WDRB in Louisville is back. He wrote this week about Fred Glass. Fred Glass obviously retiring, announcing his retirement from Indiana. Rick looked at Fred's tenure, especially his impact on the basketball program. And so we talk with Rick about that. And we also look at the current team, sitting at 10-1. What does Rick like about the current team? What does he not like? And then a more general discussion about the Big Ten and college basketball. Rick is an AP voter, and it's obviously been difficult to rank teams given how topsy-turvy it's been. So his thoughts on that and more. We always enjoy it when Rick is here, so a good conversation that I think you will enjoy. Before we get to that, though, let's talk real quick about tickets. As you know, Podcast on the Brink is sponsored by SeatGeek, and the online ticket purchasing industry is not one that has a lot of innovation, but SeatGeek has really pushed the envelope, and they have created a better process for browsing and for buying tickets. It's why I used SeatGeek long before they were even a sponsor of this show and of the Assembly Call. If you look at the App Store, they have 50,000 5-star reviews because they put the customer first. They put you first. You go to SeatGeek, you can see an interactive seat map so you know exactly where the seat is. But more important than that, you can see what the value is. What value are you getting for your dollar? And it's even visual. I mean, it's as easy to see as possible. A green dot is a good deal. A red dot is not a good value. And you can see that easily. And look, it's especially helpful if you're buying tickets at a venue that you've never been to. I did that recently. I bought my wife and I tickets to see Hamilton at Bass Music Hall in Fort Worth. Hadn't been there before. It gave me a really clear view of what tickets were good values, what tickets weren't. And I will say, if you're looking for last-minute stocking stuffers, last-minute gifts, what's better than a ticket? Because you don't have to wait for shipping. You can just print it out. I mean, you could do it Christmas Eve and have it, into Christmas morning even, have it in time to put in the stocking. So if you're looking for a last-minute gift, IU basketball tickets, concert tickets, live event tickets, whatever it is, SeatGeek will have you covered. So definitely consider them. And when you do, use the promo code BRINK, BRINK. You will get $10 off your first purchase. That's promo code BRINK, BRINK, for $10 off your first purchase at SeatGeek. Download the app today. All right, here now is our conversation with Rick Bozich. All right, very excited to be joined this week on Podcast on the Brink by Rick Bozich. And Rick, you wrote about Fred Glass. That's obviously the big news of the week. Fred Glass announcing his retirement. Were you surprised by the announcement itself, by the timing of it, when you heard the news earlier this week?
Yeah, I was. I mean, Fred's still a young guy. He's had a tremendous amount of success at Indiana, especially with football. I'd say it was his number one success, and considering they just have had 8 wins and are going to the Gator Bowl, and Tom Allen got a new contract. Trajectory is good. I thought he'd be around for a few more years to see if they could take the next step.
The discussion about it has been interesting, obviously, since the announcement, and this is a basketball show, so we're going to look at it through the prism of basketball. But I think, you'd be hard-pressed to find anybody, if you were to give Fred a grade, that would give him, anything lower than probably a B overall, given all, the good things that happened, across the athletic department, from facilities to, the soccer program, the women's basketball program, football. I mean, a lot of successes. But when you zero in just on basketball, and people who view it through the prism of just basketball, it feels like Fred is leaving with still some question marks about his leadership of the basketball program. How do you assess what happened with basketball during his tenure?
Yeah, I agree with what you said. That's what I wrote. Is you can look at all the other sports and give him very high grades, A's mainly. But when you look at basketball, it's an incomplete until we have more results and we see, where Archie Miller is going to take the program. It's incomplete, as you know. He came in not long after the NCAA probation, and so he's got the program off probation, and there are no compliance issues. They had those 3 years in the wilderness. The first 3 years of Crean were, they won 6, 7, 8 games, 10 maybe at the most, and didn't come close to making the tournament. And they had they had 3 Sweet 16 years, but nothing more than that. And it's Indiana basketball. That's never going to be good enough, and it hasn't been good enough.
When you look at the overall tenure, and you talked about some of the accomplishments, do you think there was anything specific that if he had a kind of a mulligan to go back and do differently, he would do differently? The kind of the thing that sticks out in my mind, and this goes back to the 2012-13 season, they had the season before where Zeller was a freshman. They beat Kentucky. They got to the Sweet 16, and then they were preseason number 1. And I think he gave Crean an extension kind of early in that season. I think it was in the fall, maybe October, November. I think that may be the one thing that he would look back on and say that maybe he should have waited to the end of that season. What's your sense on that decision to extend him at that time? And do you think that kind of, in hindsight, was a move that maybe he would choose a different path if he had to do it over again?
Yeah, I mean, it was a change of direction. And I guess the one thing I'll say in his defense is that what he did is sort of what most athletic directors do. They're usually quick to give extensions when people have success and enhance contracts and extends contracts. So it really wasn't something unique to Indiana. But then after the 2013 season ended in the Sweet 16, and the 2014 season when they didn't go to the NCAA tournament at all, and then 2015 they won one game. I think one game of the tournament got beat by Wichita State, I believe it was. That built some of the unrest in the fan base, and I think that's when he started to change directions. And I know that in the next season, when they did win the Big Ten title after that terrible start, and then got again to the Sweet 16, Tom Crean was looking for an extension, and he wasn't willing to do it. And I think he showed in the second instance of how he was going to handle things. So you can question that, but I don't think it's anything any other athletic director would not have done.
One of the bigger picture things I thought was interesting that you wrote about in your column over at WDRB.com was, and I don't have it here in front of me, so I can't quote it exactly, but it was just a broader kind of idea. And I think I share this. We've talked about it before. I've kind of talked about it with Jerod, that just, it feels like, and this isn't limited to Fred Glass. This is going back to 1994. It doesn't feel like Indiana has been persistent, or I don't know if that's the right word, but it hasn't demanded that its basketball program be great. And I don't know if there's anything that you can do specifically, but you look at other examples around the country. North Carolina, when things started to go south with Bill Guthridge and Daugherty, they got out of those situations pretty quickly. Kentucky hired Billy Gillespie, and they realized it was a mistake, and they pivoted to John Calipari. It seems like Indiana has kind of been still searching for such a long time, and hasn't really found. We'll see if Archie Miller works out, but why do you think it is that it's been since, the mid 90s that Indiana has been able to kind of be on stable footing, and then maybe they haven't had more, demands from the administration or the athletic department to have basketball get back to where it once was?
Well, that could be a 5-hour show. I mean, the best thing I've seen on the whole topic was the story Zach Osterman wrote about it. When was that? Like maybe 2 months ago, about, what's going on. I mean, it goes back to you could go back to the last 5 or 6 years of the Knight era, where for whatever reasons, whether he lost energy or lost focus, or the culture changed around him, or circumstances beyond his control, there was definite slippage then, where they had a lot of games where they lost the first or second game of the tournament. I mean, they really had nothing going. After 1994, I think was his last Sweet 16. And he had some decent teams. He had some decent recruits, but guys were leaving. And that was the beginning of the slippage. And as it was going on, I don't think people viewed it that way. But when you look back on it, you definitely have to view it that way. And then as much as I like Mike Davis as a human being and as a person, then he came in and, him going to the national championship game his second year was biggest moment in IU basketball since the 87 NCAA title, but it wasn't anything that was sustainable. And so then they, had Davis around through 2006 and pushed him out. So they because he went to the national championship game, he got more rope than I think he would have gotten otherwise. And then Sampson came in, and you just view him as a basketball coach. I think Sampson would have been fine. He probably would have been at IU and been at the top of the Big Ten, but that's not the case. And we all know the reasons. And then Crean came in, and Indiana punished itself the way they did. So all those things are a big factor. And the other factor is I don't think it's ever been a school that's kind of looked at it that way of like, we're going to be really demanding and really impatient and really unforgiving of any kind of excuses. It's been a little bit more measured in their response to things. And, I that's just part of the culture of IU, I think.
Rick, you are able to see Indiana up close as well as Louisville and Kentucky up close. And even though Indiana won their last game against Louisville and their last game against Kentucky, I think we'd all agree that IU basketball hasn't been on that level now for a while, to Alex's point. What do you think are, some things that Louisville does with their program, that Kentucky does with their program, that if you were to, talk to whoever's doing this search committee in terms of things they should try to look for in the AD, what are some of those things that you think an AD can bring to the table that would help Indiana get back to that level?
Yeah, I mean, in the column I wrote about, a ruthless determination to be great. And I know that Tom Jurich's exit from U of L wasn't the greatest, but when he was here, he was intolerant of excuses or intolerant of losing. And his vision was to always think big as possible. And sometimes you achieve those things and sometimes you don't. And when you've sat here and watched him and some of the football coaches he's gone after and see them go to Orange Bowls and Sugar Bowls and beat Florida State and do some of the things when you watch IU football where people just kind of shrug like they're never going to beat Penn State. They're never going to beat Michigan. They're going to never beat Ohio State. I mean, they need somebody in there that's not going to be accepting of that kind of mindset. And Glass has done that somewhat because I think you have to tip your cap to him of just the way he's changed the facility, the game day experience. It looks more like a Big Ten stadium now. Now, it's obviously not as big and as ambitious as we see at the top of the line Big Ten schools, and that's not going to change for a long, long time. But you have to at least approach it as if it will. And, I even said the same thing at Kentucky. I've seen Kentucky, they couldn't beat Florida for the longest time. Well, now they've beaten them. They won 10 games last year and went to the Outback Bowl and beat Penn State, a team that Indiana can't beat. And it's just that you set the standard of, no, this is going to happen, and you're either going to be the one to do it or they'll find somebody else who will. So I think you have to set your aspirations higher. And I know it's a basketball show, and like you guys, I'm more of a basketball guy, but football is so important. Indiana is kind of at a major disadvantage against some of these other schools because the football revenue is not what some of the other places are. And the guy that they hire as the athletic director has to continue the momentum that Fred Glass created in football and even make it higher. They got to get more people in what they draw this year, like low 40s. I mean, they need to be getting 50,000 in there. They need to get people excited about football. They need to get people saying, this is going to work, period. That's the way it has to be.
One thing Fred has been proud of, and rightfully so, it's been a part of the Indiana basketball ethos for a long time, is I think what he describes as the culture of compliance. And we have learned a lot over the past few years, if we didn't know already, about how the sausage gets made in college basketball. Mm-hmm. And we have even seen programs seemingly openly flaunt that they are, doing whatever they want. Do you think Indiana needs to change how it views that internally, Or do you think fans at all need to have more realistic expectations if they would not be willing to endorse Indiana maybe not being so focused on adhering to the letter of every law?
I
know that's a tricky question.
I like the culture of compliance. I think it's a great thing if you're going to have, your program values, your core values. I think that's a very good one to have near the top of the list. Where I think, and I've heard this from people who've been at IU, is that sometimes they take it too far on some of the little things, and it becomes that aren't really major issues. I think coaches have gotten frustrated, or they feel hassled by the compliance department by some of the things that happen. Now, and I've also heard from previous coaching staffs, when recruiting was going south, that, they were at a disadvantage because they weren't going to do some of the things that they were saying other schools did. And I give credit to Tom Crean's staff for that. If what they are saying is true, was going on with some of the other schools on players they lost, and they weren't going to do that, I have to give credit to Tom Crean and IU for not doing that. It's just, I don't think people at large will give credit for that. It is a very tricky subject because we think of all the different issues that are going on in college basketball. We've seen a lot of it revealed, and Indiana was just on the periphery of some of that stuff, but it makes it tough. But I think there are other ways you can find to upgrade the tenacity or the value of your program in terms of thinking bigger. And I know we're going to talk later about the Crossroads Classic, but I think that's been one of the, personally to me, that's one of the downfalls of the Glass area, is he was so in love with that thing, and I don't see how IU really benefits from it. And if the story is in fact true that they had an opportunity to go in that CBS Sports Classic in the slot that Ohio State had, I think that was a gross miscalculation. You've got to look at what is going to appeal to recruits, not what's going to make the city of Indianapolis or the fan base in Indianapolis feel better. And I think that was a mistake.
When you look at, the prospect of Indiana, they missed 3 straight tournaments. We'll see what happens this year. But how important do you think it is for Archie Miller to get to the tournament this year, given the fact that he's going to be working for a new boss come this summer and going into his 4th year? Is this, it's obviously they're not going to do anything after this season, regardless of the outcome. But how important is it for him to get momentum going in the right direction, given that he's going to be working for an AD that didn't bring him in?
It's hard for me to calculate that because I don't know who the guy is going to be and whether he has any pre-existing relationship with him, or how the new guy would view that. I think it would be important for him from the standpoint of just current college basketball reality of it's hard to maintain any kind of momentum in recruiting or among the opinion makers in college basketball if you go 4 straight years and not make the tournament. It's hard to project yourself as a program that's improving or somebody that needs to be watched as on the move in college basketball if you go your 3rd straight year and the program's 4th straight year and not make a 68 team tournament when you look at some of the other programs that are making it.
Guys, I want to spend some more time here talking about the current team and what we see there. Before we do that, though, I do want to mention our sponsor, Home Field Apparel. As we record this right now, I am wearing my favorite hoodie, the Bison logo hoodie, amazingly comfortable. I recently got all of my Christmas shopping done, did a lot of it on Home Field Apparel. Basically, all the IU fans that are on my Christmas list got Home Field gear because they have unique logos that you can't find anywhere else. It's amazingly comfortable when you get it, after you wash it. And, it's run by an Indiana grad based in Indianapolis. We love Home Field Apparel. We've been working with them on the Assembly Call for 4 years. I think, Alex, they've been a sponsor now on Podcast on the Brink for 3 years. Personally, I have to second guess all of that after the shirt that they recently released, Alex, the IU Oval shirt, which some people really like. I have issues with it. Connor and I have talked about this privately for a long time, my issues with the Oval shirt. But for those of you who enjoy the worst logo in IU sports history, you can now get that shirt at homefieldapparel.com. Alex is shaking his head as I'm ripping our sponsor during a paid spot.
I think it's only a limited release too, so you better get it now if you want it.
It is. I've made my feelings known on that, but if you like it, if it brings back, if it evokes wonderful memories of Antoine Randall, I get it. It's there. Now, we're recording this on December 18th. I think it'll be published on December 18th. I know I saw a tweet from them earlier today that said if you want stuff by Christmas, they will try their best to get it out. But the last time I talked to Connor, he said to guarantee Christmas delivery, you needed to order by the 15th. So I don't know for sure, what that situation is, but if you get an order in ASAP today or tomorrow, they might be able to get it in. You can tweet them at Hopefield Apparel and see. But use our promo code BRINK. You will get 20% off your entire order. That's promo code BRINK at homefieldapparel.com. Homefieldapparel.com, promo code BRINK. All right, so let's talk about the current team. Indiana sits at 10-1. They have a couple of really good victories over Florida State, a neutral court victory over UConn included in there. 1-1 start in the Big Ten, and yet, Rick, it feels like there's a lot of angst about this team and a lot of very legitimate question marks. Like, I don't think this is just obviously there are some ridiculous IU fans out there, but I don't think this is just IU fans being ridiculous or have unreasonable expectations. There are issues that as you project forward, you can see, really making it difficult for Indiana to beat some of the better teams on the schedule. So how do you assess these first 11 games, and how comfortable are you moving forward with where this team is at?
The first 11 games I assess as, other than the Wisconsin game and I guess the Nebraska game, the performance was about what I thought it would be. I mean, the Louisiana Tech game was impressive, and the Florida State games were impressive. But there's two things that are like very bright, persistent, flashing red lights. And one is defense. And I'm not just talking about the pack line defense and sometimes the issues they have giving up 3-point shots. It's just straight man-to-man, straight line drive defense of too many guys getting beat off the dribble for layups or for penetration kickouts, and not just freshmen. I mean, veteran guys who aren't staying in front of their guys for whatever reason. And Archie Miller sees it, acknowledges it, and says it has to improve. But there hasn't been any evidence it didn't improve against Nebraska. When they hung up 90 in overtime, that was a big flashing red light. And the second thing is just health. It's for whatever reason, now for the second straight year, they just can't ever keep the team consistently healthy. And just when it seemed like they got everybody back, Infinity played more minutes. Now there's talk about Devontae Green and a sore Achilles, and they're just so their margin for error in the backcourt is so small that if they lose any one of those guys, it really puts to me it puts their season in jeopardy. If Infinity gets hurt or Devontae Green, I can't see them being a successful Big Ten team over the final 18 games of the Big Ten season without Devontae Green and or Finney. They got to have both guys, and they really have to have both guys playing at a high level. We've seen the thing that I've liked about the team is, I mean, when Finney and Trace Jackson Davis play at a high level, you got two pieces that you could play against any team in the Big Ten. They're really good players, but man, you got to have all your pieces, and you got to have them healthy.
I think, and Jerod and I have talked about this a lot. I don't know if we talked about it on the show, but we've talked about it privately. I think these next two games are pivotal for Indiana for a couple reasons. One, if they can beat Notre Dame and Arkansas, they could finish the non-conference portion of their schedule unbeaten. Now, they didn't have a strong non-conference strength of schedule, but to go through that whole non-conference and be unbeaten, I think would be an impressive feat, regardless of who you're playing. It's tough to go 11-0 in non-conference. The second reason is I look at the Big Ten right now, and I look at Indiana's road schedule. They've already gone to Wisconsin, but I'm looking at the road games that they would have a chance to win. And I'm not saying that obviously they beat Michigan State on the road last year, so anything could happen. But I look at places like Rutgers, who just beat Seton Hall and Wisconsin at home. I look at Minnesota, who just throttled Ohio State at home. And I'm looking around Nebraska, who just beat Purdue. Where are the road wins going to come from? So Indiana, if you believe that they're going to have to get to 19 or 20 wins to make the tournament, they need to take care of business in these next two games that are very winnable. One in Bankers Life Fieldhouse against Notre Dame, and then also returning at home to play Arkansas. Do you agree with the importance of these upcoming games, given what you've seen transpire in the Big Ten so far, particularly with how difficult it's going to be going on the road to win?
Yeah, I mean, I think you definitely have to win one of them for sure. And two would be, you're right. I mean, if you finish your non-conference schedule unbeaten, and even though the first 7 games were not very demanding of them, but if you can throw up a non-conference resume of wins over Florida State and Connecticut, and then throw in Notre Dame and Arkansas, that would be a plus on Selection Sunday. And I agree with you that the problem with, every team in the Big Ten, for the most part, other than I guess Ohio State and Michigan and Maryland, are probably saying, well, Michigan's found that out, where are the road wins going to come? So a lot of teams are going to take road wins. As confounding as Indiana's loss to Wisconsin was, I was confounded by the fact that Ohio State got beat that badly on the road by Minnesota, which got beat badly on the road by Iowa. We're going to see a lot of strange results throughout the whole season. So if they win both those games, obviously a big help, because it'll, what would that be in the non-conference? Would that be 11-0 or 12? I'm not sure. What would it be? 11?
It'd be 11-0.
11-0 it's hard to knock that. It's not the greatest schedule in the world, but it's not the worst. So yeah, I mean, I'd say you got to win one. I mean, and Notre Dame is an 8-man team basically, which is played pretty good the last game. Didn't they win last weekend against somebody?
UCLA, who's not very good right now.
Yeah, and they blew out.
They also lost at home to Boston College, and
yeah, they did.
Had some.
I mean, that's a team they need to beat. I mean, they've beaten them in the Crossroads Classic. The last 2 times they played them, although they've been close games.
I think they're 3-1 overall against, because this is the 9th year of the Crossroads. They've beaten Notre Dame 3 out of the 4.
Yeah, what are they? They're like in the 60s in Ken Palm, I think. I mean, they should. Arkansas will be a tougher game, I think, because Arkansas is more athletic. They got one of the nation's best 3-point shooters in Isaiah Joe. I think Musselman's a pretty good coach, but Indiana struggled. Beat him once last year. It was tough, and lost to him on the shot after Deron Davis didn't make that tap in last year. So I don't know if either one of those teams project as an NCAA tournament team. I would think Notre Dame's probably on the wrong side of the bubble, and I'm not sure about Arkansas. Is not very far behind Indiana, though, in KenPom, I don't think. Aren't they?
They were ahead of them. They were one spot ahead last time I checked.
Yeah.
They've only lost one game. I think it was at Western Kentucky, and that was the game where Charles Bassey got hurt. So Western Kentucky, it's not an east place to win. So
right. So yeah, those would be 2 huge credentials. But I mean, if they go 11-0, then you're saying last year they almost got in with 8-12, right? Mm-hmm. Non-conference.
Yeah.
They were 1 win away from getting in. So, yeah.
They also won. I think they also won 3 Big Ten road games last year. Is that right, Jerod?
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Michigan State, Penn State, and one other one. Illinois.
Yeah. Win them both would be huge, but win one. To me, win one's the minimum. They need to win one of the 2. Because if they don't, it's going to kick up all the the howling and screaming that came up after the Wisconsin game and came up even after the Nebraska game. It's the loss to Wisconsin, as ridiculous as it was to be behind by 30 points to that Wisconsin team, which had lost 3 in a row. Mm-hmm. Was not quite as head scratching as the performance against Nebraska when they started out ahead. Was it 11-2, 11-4, whatever, and it looked like they were going to run them out of the gym, and then still had an 8-point lead in the second half, and then turned the ball over, and then they're giving up all those threes at the end, and Finney finally bailed them out in overtime. I mean, that was, to me, was more concerning about just guys not getting it in terms of how important defense is, or how to play defense, or whatever it is. They've had an 8-day break to figure it out. They need to figure it out.
Well, on that point, I wanted to talk a little bit more about defense, because we all know the defense isn't where it needs to be. And, the offense has been better this year, and it might be a little bit different if this entire program were framed as an offense-first program. But this program, the identity is supposed to be defense. And so I think when people who really watch the team closely, harp on the defense, a big reason why is because the coach does. And the coach essentially sees the same things and talks about the same things in the post-game press conference that the rest of us do. So my question for you is, what do you think is the best way for Archie to try to manage that this season? Because we're in the third year of the pack line. A lot of other pack line programs have seen a big jump in the third year, and yet Indiana is not right now. There are some issues that are out of Archie's control. I mean, the team has to get healthy. There are still some young guys as he rebuilds the roster in his own image, and there's nothing he can really do about that. But should he stay firmly committed to his pack line principles, even if a team like Nebraska comes out with a game plan that is picking the defense apart both because of the personnel and just because it's generally a weakness of that defense? Or should he adjust a little bit to this personnel because winning in the short term is so important if the pack line isn't ready to be run at the highest level yet?
Yeah, I think where he sometimes has an issue is that some of his best defensive players are not his best offensive players. And so when they go through these lulls where they can't score, then he might go back to some guys who are more offensive oriented, who aren't very good on defense. And it really isn't very satisfying either way. I think he needs to make a decision of, he's been playing 11 guys quite a bit, and that's probably good for the locker room in many ways. And he's probably still experimenting, trying to figure out. But most coaches, I learned this a long time ago from Denny Crum, who, in terms of overall basketball coaches, is maybe the best one I've ever seen up close, all encompassing. And his view was pretty much 8 guys. 8 guys is what you go with. 5 guys get the majority of the minutes, maybe 4. And then the rest of the guys, get their 10 to 15. And that's the way to do it. I'm not sure that 11 does it. And I would like to see him go with, if defense is going to be your calling card, then go with the dudes who are going to guard. And if you got guys who just won't do the job guarding, then they might have to sit for a while until they figure it out. Because I think we all believe that, a high percentage of your ability to be a good defender is want to and valuing it and taking pride in it. Put guys out there that, are going to take pride in it. When they get beat off the dribble consistently, then you're going to sit for a while and you're going to figure out, what are you doing wrong? Are you not reading the scouting report? And so when that left-handed dude from Nebraska has the ball on the right wing and he's going to go left and go right down the middle of the lane and drive and lay it in, you don't let him do it because you force him to the right because he's not as strong on the right hand. But we see little fundamental things like that just make you say, what are these dudes doing?
On the flip side, obviously Indiana's 10-1 for a reason, and some things are really working. Their identity coming into the season, Archie Miller talked about, they want to get to the free throw line, they want to rebound. They've done both of those things on a game-in, game-out basis. And that's the kind of stuff that, if they can keep doing it, that will translate to wins on the road if it's combined with reducing turnovers and playing defense. So how impressed are you with Indiana's ability to do that, given some of the youth that they're relying on, like Trace Jackson Davis? And how sustainable do you think it is as we start going into Big Ten road games where the whistle might not be as friendly and where the physicality is really going to ratchet up on guys like Trace?
I've been very impressed by their inside tenacity, not just throwing the ball down on the block and creating ways for Jackson Davis or Justin Smith or at times Brink. He had that big 3-play sequence in the Connecticut game to score. And he had even other stretches where he didn't score, but was given the opportunity to try and score. And if that's what you say you're going to do, then you should do it. And I think it is a good plan, especially for a team that's, as we know, not a great 3-point shooting team. So that's a wise decision by a coach to say, we're not going to win games by sitting here taking a bunch of threes. We're going to go inside and try and get easy baskets and go to the foul line and get 3-point plays, or go to the foul line for 2 shots late in the games. And their offensive rebounding has been impressive. I mean, they overwhelmed Nebraska on the boards. It's one of the reasons why they won. So I like what they're doing. Is it sustainable? I don't think it'll be as sustainable, obviously, against better competition, because those guys won't foul as much. They'll be able to, stop turn away drivers or block out guys or get rebounds. And you're right, you don't get as many calls on the road in the Big Ten. You probably won't even get as many as home in the Big Ten against better competition. But it's still it'll work sometimes. And so if that's the course they want to go, I think they should stay on it, because we haven't seen, other than Devontae Green against Florida State, somebody who's just going to stand out there and make threes. Then that's something they need to solve going forward. Not this year, but next year. I mean, you got to. I've seen enough games. If you either have to be able to stop the three or make the three, one or the other. And if you get in a situation where you're not making threes and you're giving up threes, you've got a big problem. And that's one thing we saw in the Nebraska game. Were they 5 for 26? Indiana was 5 for 26 from three.
Yep.
And Nebraska was making threes, and that's a good way to find yourself in big trouble. And so until Leal or Galloway or whoever else can come in and start making threes, they always need to be finding shooters.
You're an AP voter again this year. I haven't talked about it too much with you. I've been trying to avoid even trying to figure that stuff out on a week-to-week basis. What has it been different this year with all of the turnover at the top, and how have you kind of gone about putting your poll together on a week-to-week basis? And I know every year has different challenges, but this year with all the turnover at number one, what's it been like on a week-to-week basis trying to come up with the 25 best teams?
It's usually just hard at the bottom, but this year it's hard all the way through, because you start looking at, this year, you look at the teams on the top and they all have pretty significant flaws. I mean, you look at Kansas, I know, is number one, but I didn't vote for them for number one because they lost to Duke, but they don't really have a signature win. They've beaten some decent teams, but no great teams. I did end up voting for Gonzaga because they won back-to-back road games against Washington and Arizona, but they had that loss to Michigan, which got blown out by Louisville. And, Duke loses at home to Stephen F. Austin, which is not a result. You think of a number one team, and Kentucky loses at home to Evansville. And then really at the bottom of the poll, pretty much shift out the bottom four spots almost every week. I end up throwing DePaul in there this week because they've only had one loss. And, I threw Wichita State in there. They don't have a great win, but they've only lost one game. And I have respect for Marshall as a coach. So I haven't put Indiana in there yet. I put Penn State in this week because they end up beating they beat Maryland at home, and then they beat Alabama at home. And I think they're pretty good, and they got older dudes. So I think they're a fairly solid team. I considered Rutgers after their big week, but it's going to be a week where if you have a good week, you have a chance to get in the bottom of the poll. And I think we'll continue to have turnover because Kansas in the Big 12, I mean, Baylor's pretty good, and there's one or two. West Virginia's not bad. Kansas will take a few losses.
Have you considered throwing darts just to make life easier on yourself?
I'm going to do with what I did in college football, where we picked Eric Crawford and I pick games every week, and my dog Ruby picked games with us, and I'd took a coin and put it on top of her nose and let it fall off, and heads was the home team and tails was the road team. So I might do that because I know that people say that every year, but I mean, this year, I think some of the losses have been even more head scratching. And the Big Ten, I guess if I had to step back now and say, who do I really like in the Big Ten? Although Ohio State got beat that bad at Minnesota, I think Ohio State has been the best team so far in the Big Ten. And Michigan has probably been the second best team, and then maybe Maryland too. And then it's always stupid to write off Michigan State because I think Izzo he overschedules his team, and he sort of embraces turmoil and uncertainty, but kind of figures it out as they go along. And we don't know if Langford's going to get healthy. And then after that, I mean, man, you could make a case for a lot of different teams. I mean, you can make a case for Purdue. You could make a case for Penn State. You can make a case for Rutgers. You can make a case for Indiana. You can make a case for Illinois.
Iowa.
To be fair, they're all tied for first,
yeah.
Basically.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be the key to me this year is going to be what coach can keep his team positive and not let losses linger and become 2 or 3 losses. If you lose a game, you got to forget about it and win the next game. And the coach that can do that, I think, will have the best chance of getting his team in the upper division of the league. And, around Indiana, I think a lot of the reason there's so much nervousness and uncertainty is people think back to 12 out of 13 last year, and people need to see that this team's not going to let one loss become 3 losses or 7 losses, and that's the thing that I think this team needs to do. They're gonna. Who do they play? Is Northwestern their next Big Ten game?
At Maryland.
At Maryland, and then Northwestern at home.
Then Ohio State at home.
Oh, I thought Northwestern was in there fairly early.
No, it is. It's at Maryland, Northwestern at home, Ohio State at home, and then at Rutgers and Nebraska. So 2 of probably their most winnable road games are going to be in mid-January. So that could tell us kind of a lot about.
Got to win those.
Where things are going.
Better get at least one of those.
Yeah, and that's the thing people will be looking at. Like if you end up losing, they're probably not going to beat Maryland. Then you have to beat Northwestern, and then you've got Ohio State at home. If you lose that, and then you're facing 2 Big Ten road games. You can't let one loss become 3. You just can't do it.
That's this year. We say this every year, but I think the one thing that's kind of been missing so far from Indiana, like when Crean had his really good teams, Indiana was basically unbeatable at home in the Big Ten for a couple of years. I mean, they had some games that they lost. Obviously, the year they won the Big Ten outright, they lost that game to Ohio State. But they were winning 8 or 9 home games in the league every year. And Archie so far hasn't been able to do that. He's had some good wins at home, like last season over Michigan State. But given how difficult things are going to be on the road this year, I think it's very important that Indiana protects its home court in conference. I think they need to win at least, I don't think it's realistic to say they need to win every home game, but if they can't win 7 or 8 of the home games, 8, then I just don't necessarily think they're going to be, reaching expectations that kind of, because if they go in 12-1, and then all of a sudden we kind of see, last year they were 12-2, and then we, see the losses start to pile up. Then it's kind of last season all over again. I think in the eyes of many people.
Yeah, I'd say 7 would be the minimum, and you shoot for 8. And I don't know how realistic it is, or what is Pomeroy still having 10-10 in the league?
Last I checked, yeah.
Yeah. So it's going to be injuries and health, and it's going to be mindset of like, okay, we lost the game and move on to the next one, not just for Indiana, but for everybody in the league. Because it is going to be, it's going to be a dogfight all the way across the board. And even though Northwestern looks like by far the worst team in the league, they'll end up shocking somebody. Is it tonight they play Michigan State at home?
Michigan State to make it 14 straight for the home teams. Come on, Northwestern.
No, it's Northwestern tonight, not Nebraska. You said Nebraska is the worst?
Northwestern.
Northwestern's the worst team in the league, but don't they have like 1 or 2 reasonably good wins?
They beat Providence.
No, they got some. Yeah, Providence is bad. They've got some awful losses. There's no doubt about that. But Nebraska had awful losses too. Then they get blitzed by UC Riverside and somebody else at home to start the season. So
they lost their first 2 home games. Then they were down by like over 30 at Creighton.
Then suspended one of their leading scorers and almost beat Indiana at Assembly Hall. So everything makes sense.
That's coaching. It's like there's so many situations where a team goes through something like that the negativity would just overwhelm the program, and maybe they don't care about it enough at Nebraska that it would do that. But that's a point where you'd say, man, this season's lost. If something like that would happen at a Purdue or an Indiana or Ohio State where they lost to Creighton by 30 points, people would be going nuts. But at Nebraska, it was like, oh, no big deal. Come back, and they come back and play their 2 better games of the year right after that. And that's what you have to do to be successful. You have to just say, okay, that was awful. It's now irrelevant, and the next game is what matters. And that didn't seem to be the case last year. The losses kind of lingered.
No. And, I think that's one thing most people have said watching the team this year is it looks like they have better chemistry. Like, viscerally, I think all fans watching them feel like the chemistry is better, the toughness is better. But I'll also remind everybody that in December of last year, we were thinking some of those things too, and they got off to the good start. So it's important to keep all that in mind, and, we'll just have to see how the season plays out. But a solid start for Indiana, record-wise, and doing a lot of things that they need to do to win. Now got to pick up the defense, and prove, Rick, as you said, that last year was an aberration in terms of the losses piling up, and that they will be more of a ship with a rudder this year in Big Ten play because they're going to need it.
Yeah, to me, the number one thing is health. I mean, they've got to have a healthy Finney.
Yeah,
and I don't think we've seen that all year. He's not only their leader on the court in terms of controlling tempo and getting him into offense, but he's also a guy who can, as we've seen, he can do to other teams what guys have done to Indiana is beat his guy off the dribble and get to the rim and score. We saw it in the UConn game. We saw it in the Florida State game. And he hasn't been healthy all year, I don't think, and he hasn't practiced all year, and he can be their best on-the-ball defender. So hopefully for them in this stretch of the season where they haven't played as many games, he's gotten even healthier. And as they finally get into conference play, you see who Rob Finney really is. To me, where they're going to go this year will be determined by Rob Finney in a lot of ways. I mean, Devontae Green is the X factor because he's going to have a 30-point game followed by a 3-point game, and he's a senior now, and I don't think that's going to change. But Finney is a guy who's more likely to consistently give him 12 to 14 with 6 assists and 7 rebounds night after night after night.
Well said. Follow him on Twitter at Rick Bozich. Rick, we always appreciate you joining us on Podcast on the Brink. Merry Christmas and have a happy
Merry
New Year as well.
Christmas to you. I thank you for having me on, and enjoy your show. And it's tell Ryan I said hi. I love it when he rants.
Well, that makes one of us. I will tell him. Thanks, Rick.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Podcast on the Brink. We always appreciate you being here. Remember to join me and my co-hosts for more IU basketball talk at assemblycall.com and visit Alex over at insidethehall.com for complete coverage of Indiana basketball. If you want to support Podcast on the Brink, here is the single best way to do it. Tell anyone you know who loves IU hoops about us and suggest that they subscribe. Podcast on the Brink can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else podcasts are available. Tell your social media followers, email your friends, text your family members. For weekly discussion about IU basketball, they need to be subscribed to Podcast on the Brink. We'll talk to you next time. Go Hoosiers.